So you found out now, find out how, what was wrong and what is right now.
Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Found Out, your social justice podcast brought to you by us, the Merrittocracy. So first of all, I just want to say a massive thank you for all the love that episode 1 got. It was really overwhelming in the best possible way. Lots of people from decades ago getting in contact with saying how much it resonated and how much they really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for all the positive feedback. It was really fantastic. So today we have a really, really exciting episode for you all. We are going to be talking about prisons. We've been really lucky to be working in and around the prison space for nearly sort of the last decade, give or take. And I think everyone in sort of society and the general public have a really interesting view on prisons because everyone has a sort of imagination of what a prison is like from TV and film and books. But very few people have actually been inside of a prison. So we are going to explore what all of that is like from our experience. And we've got a very special guest also. So we're going to start today's episode with a few prison factoids. And I'm going to throw over to Laura to cover some of those.
So a few facts about prisons in England and Wales. There are 87,000-ish prisoners in just over 120 prisons, and 96% of prisoners are adult males, which makes them the vast, vast majority. And a little bit about the profile of people in prison in England and Wales, because I think it's often, when we talk about this, not what people expect, which is that 1 in 4 have been through the care system, 57% have a reading age under the age of 11, which sort of essentially, means that they're functionally illiterate. 50 to 60% of male prisoners report a traumatic brain injury, and over a third have learning disabilities or a wider disability, which I think is absolutely huge and is probably not what people expect. In terms of the prison system here in England and Wales, I think it's fair to say that, we have some of the highest reoffending rates in Europe. 43% of prisoners reoffend within 6 months of leaving custody. And for those who serve sentences under 12 months, that is up to over 2/3, over 66%, which is absolutely massive. I'm sure we'll be talking about that through today's episode. And for an international bonus ball, because the US has been in the news a huge amount over the last few weeks, sometimes to the extent that it feels like it's more US news than UK news here. The US make up 4% of the global population, but 25% of the global incarcerated population, which is over 2 million people in prison in the USA. So I know we have a few US listeners, so just wanted to make that comparison. It's actually 4 times the number of people imprisoned in the US than in the UK in terms of percentage of the population. And today, absolutely delighted to be joined by our very special guest, Chris Atkins, who deep expertise on prisons. I would say knows
all
prisons,
the wrong reasons, yeah.
Knows prisons better than most.
Yes.
And for those who don't know Chris is a best-selling author of 2 books, which we've actually got here with us in the studio today, Time After Time and A Bit of a Stretch. Both fantastic. If you haven't read them, then you know what, stop listening to this podcast and go and read them right now and then come back. And Chris, not only is Chris an amazing author, Chris is also a legendary documentary maker. Many, many, many fantastic works, which you can no doubt look up after this. And for the kind of likes of Panorama, Dispatches, and Chris, you also served 5 years, or you were sentenced to 5 years in prison for tax fraud. Mm-hmm. And you're also a dear friend of mine. So I'm very, very grateful.
Very colourful CV, yes.
That you've come on today's podcast. Welcome to Found Out, Chris.
Thanks for having me on.
So the first question we wanted to kick off with today is, because I think there'll be a lot of people listening for whom the prison world is entirely alien. So why should those listening care about prisons?
I get asked this a lot, and especially I think in a society that is very sort of fixated on punishment and fixated on being seen to cause damage to people who've broken the law. That's what our criminal justice system is sort of shaped around. the question gets asked, why should law-abiding people care what happens to prisoners? Oh, they've done something wrong, therefore who cares if their food's a bit rubbish? And the way I always flip it back is saying, okay, you might not care about prisoners, but do you care about crime? And they say, oh, yeah, no, crime, yeah, massive issue, yes. And you think there's too much crime? Definitely there's too much crime. And I say, right, well, 80% of all crime is committed by reoffenders. So it's people who've been convicted, gone to prison, come out and done it again. And that's 4 out of 5 of all crimes.
Crazy stat.
And as you were saying before, with the sky high levels of reoffending, it's you have a small group of people in society who commit crimes over and over and over and over again and cause untold misery to millions of people. So, and that's a direct consequence of a failed prison system, because people go into prison. I saw this. I was in prison for 2.5 years. And you would see people come in and all the things that had gone wrong in their lives that had caused them to commit crime were made worse by being in the failed prison system. So they'd walk out and commit crimes all over again. And that's what my second book, Time After Time, is about. Is looking at that cycle of reoffending. It's not this idea that someone was in the wrong place, wrong time, or made a mistake, or had a terrible childhood, or whatever it was. It's the fact that, no, they've just been made much worse criminals by being in the UK prison system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's often that people forget is that the vast majority of prisoners will leave prison and re-enter your community.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's something even on that very, very base level, let alone the kind of morality and ethics of a society being judged by how it treats its prisoners. Actually, on that very base level, these are people who will be re-entering your community every single day.
Every day. They're going to come, they're going to live next door to you, and they might well break into your house and steal something because the prison system made them into people more likely to commit crime. That's why you should care about prisons.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting, isn't it? Like Chris, you touched on it there. The kind of clash between lock them up and throw away the key, which seems to be the dominant political rhetoric from both sides of the
every side, really.
Every side. It's yet the want and need for rehabilitation on the point that you're making. I don't know where you sort of sit with that. Like, what could shift? What would be a sort of fundamental shift for you within the system that you start to see that sort of tip into the favour of rehabilitation?
I think if people want an effective criminal justice system, they need to be honest. And the problem is there's so many myths and so much kind of misinformation that is put out by various bits of the news media, but also by politicians. They sort of feed off each other. That sort of creates this sort of mirage for the public that the idea that the more brutal you are, the more sadistic, the more painful the punishment, then they'll never do it again. And that is it's just a complete myth, and it's a myth that's just supported over and over again. You see it every day if you're really, really unfortunate enough to read the Daily Mail comments. You just see people say this over and over again, and no one's standing there and saying, no, if you make a prison system overly sadistic and overly brutal, which is what ours currently is, you will just screw people up so much that the only thing they can do when they get out is commit more crime. That is all that is open to them. Yeah. If you rob someone of their support network, if you rob them of their dignity and their job and their family, which is what going to prison does, it didn't for me, but it does for most people, then they come out, the only support network they've got are criminals. The only place they've got to stay is a trap house. And then everyone scratched their heads going, oh, why did he go back into drugs again? There was nothing else there for him when he got out. And you'd completely dismantled every single legitimate part of his support structure, like deliberately, willfully, which is what the prison system does. And then you come out and go, oh, why did he get back into crime? It's like, what else are you going to do?
Obviously,
And it's something that it's very easy to stand there on the sidelines in also middle class ivory towers and say, wasn't it towers? You should get in with some people who aren't criminals, or you should go and live somewhere that isn't a drug dealer's house. And it's like it's impossible for those people. Yeah. And the cycle just perpetuates.
Yeah. And that, that really comprehensive, effective, reducing reoffending support and care for people when they leave prison is far cheaper ultimately to the taxpayer and to people
than prison. Vastly cheaper, yeah.
Than the cost of reoffending when you think about cost of harm and and then risk.
So it's more expensive to send someone to Wandsworth, which is where I was. More expensive to send someone to Wandsworth than it is to Eton. Okay.
Yeah, that is crazy.
It's the bonkers thing. So you parcel it like that and say, actually, if you just had a really, really good probation officer and a really good drug rehabilitation course and some dedicated mental health, it would cost a fraction of what it costs to lock up someone in a Cat B jail.
Yeah.
Absolute fraction. And we know that support network reduces reoffending overwhelmingly. We know it does. That's all been cut. We know that extensive prison, increases reoffending. And that's what we keep doing. So it's like all the evidence shows that going down one path lowers crime and going down another path increases crime. And we've got rid of all the stuff that lowers crime and we keep doing the stuff that increases crime, which is prison.
Before you move on, Lou, do you think as a society we're addicted to prison as a punishment?
There's something really odd about it that viewed from afar, viewed through the lens of the Sun, the Daily Mail, and whatever comes out of Robert Jenrick's mouth, viewed through that lens, there is a certain feeling of like perverse gratification that the man in the street or the woman in the street at the end of their, Facebook, whatever it is they get their news from, feels when somebody goes down. When they're like, yeah, lock them up. Yeah, they lock that guy up. And there's a feeling of, yeah, great. Even though that person's sitting on their, end of their keyboard in Kettering, or that's absolutely nothing to do with it. There's a feeling like, yeah, we got one, and look at them suffer. It's an odd thing that it's quite unique to the UK in an odd way. It's like you go and I'm sure you guys have done this as well. You do research about how other societies deal with criminal justice. You don't get the sort of that mob feel. That sort of put them in stocks and throw fruit at them, or the public hanging. I think it comes from that, and it comes from this for all sorts of reasons. But it's a very British thing that we just want to see people suffer and not just go to prison for a certain amount of time and hopefully change their ways. It's to go and really have just an awful time. So when you see stuff in the news about, prison runs out of food or prison runs out of toilet roll or something like that, which you do occasionally get these stories. You look at the comments and it's all good. They shouldn't have toilet roll. They shouldn't have food. And it's like, no, those are just normal people who are kind of doing this, but they kind of get whipped up that we feel like this is great that these people are having just the worst imaginable time of their lives.
Yeah.
And I guess on that, do you think it should be painful for criminals?
I think it is. I mean, the thing is, it's difficult to explain to people who haven't been through the system. It's like, I went to prison. I did what I was accused of doing, hands up. And, I went to prison. The worst bit of the whole experience to me was being separated from my family. Mm-hmm. That was terrible in every way. And whether I was having like good food or rubbish food sort of didn't really touch the sides. Mm. The loss of liberty, the shame, the embarrassment, what I thought was the end of my career, and being separated from my 4-year-old son, that was just awful in every way. It made me kick myself for doing everything I did and everything else. So to then sort of kick a man when he's down, or woman, and twist the knife is just completely sadistic and counterproductive, because you've already inflicted huge harm on someone by putting them away somewhere, away from their family. Yeah. So why make it like even worse than it needs to be? Mm-hmm. You could say, right, but we are going to show you a bit of humanity and a bit of respect, and hopefully you'll learn to show a bit of humanity and respect to other people. Mm-hmm. That's how I think it should be done. Yeah. I don't think you should get rid of prison. I think sentence lengths are too long for a lot of crimes, but you do need it. You do need to have that. There's some really dangerous people out there that need locking up. And I met a lot of them inside. So I'm not someone going, hey, let all the criminals out, far from it. But I just think that conditions do not need to be like completely inhumane and barbaric and sadistic, which is how they are.
Yeah.
Yes, the loss of freedom is the punishment.
That's enough. That's enough.
Chris, you touched on it there, but I think the listeners, the watchers, would really love to hear a bit more about your sort of background and what sort of led you into the prison system. So I thought, would you mind just telling us a little bit about your career and sort of how you ended up in prison through that route? Yeah,
because the two are kind of interlinked. So I was, I am a film producer, film director, journalist, author, media thing.
Creative superstar, aka.
Yeah, what was it? The Nathan self-facilitating media node.
Hey, nice.
Is the Nathan Barley quote. So I got very, very lucky. I got into filmmaking when I was very, very young, like literally just walked out of university. It was a time when the film business in the UK was sort of booming, and idiots who had no experience could just walk in and just pick up a camera and start making stuff, which is sort of what happened to me. And at the time, from the very late 90s through the 2000s, I made a whole bunch of films, some of which were quite successful, some of which you might never heard of. But I was, as I said, just right place, right time. And I started making movies with the likes of people like Working Title, who made Four Weddings. I didn't work on Four Weddings, but I was making films with Working Title when I was like in my 20s as a producer. And I met a guy called Richard Jobson, who some of your older listeners may remember because he was in a band called the Skids. And then was then a TV presenter, and then he was a very, very successful film director. And I was his producer on 3 films. So I made 3 films with him back to back. And like one of them got picked up by New Line in America because we had one of the Hobbits in from the Lord of the Rings. So we had this big American release, and I was going out to LA, and I was like 26, and I was going, this is crazy. Like most people I knew who were trying to get into the business were still runners. And I was like producing these films. So it was all like a real roller coaster. And it was all great. And I was having a really, really good career. I was like, I'm making a film every year. But there was a dark side to it, which was that in that era, there was a lot of tax avoidance money flowing through the film industry. And when I say a lot, I mean, the figures are put at like 10 billion or something. It was insane.
With a B.
Yeah.
Billion, wow.
10 billion, they think, went from tax avoidance through the film industry in those 10 years.
Wow.
And the idea was to stimulate investment and to make more films and to have it's something that could maybe even rival or akin to what happened in America, because we didn't really have a proper British film industry. So they gave these huge tax breaks to people who wanted to invest in British films. The problem is almost from the outset, this did get abused. And this is all on public record. People can look this up. What your listeners may remember is a lot of footballers and celebrities, people like Jimmy Carr, this is all on public record, were investing in schemes that weren't wholly, what's the right word? In the spirit of the legislation is the best way of saying it. So a lot of it wasn't criminal, but it's that whole thing of like immoral tax avoidance. But this was at a time when those sorts of words weren't in the public sphere. I'm not saying this to defend it. It wasn't until much later after the financial crash that people were saying, oh God, these people are ripping off the tax man, and that's a bad thing because we have less money for public services. At the time, it was just, the floodgates opened. So as a filmmaker, you found that as a very good source of money. You would go and see the tax guys, and they would say, you fill in these forms, and you sign this, and you stamp this, the money goes from A to B to C, and you get your cash to make a movie. And you were like, brilliant.
Sweet.
Give me some more, please. So that was the culture. And as I said, I was quite young. I hadn't really had an experience as a producer. Suddenly I was experienced as an accountant. So you just basically went and got your cash from these people, and the movies got made. As I said, some of them are very, very good. Some of them weren't very good. And you just sort of got on with it, really. So I got sort of sucked into that. And then as a consequence of that, there was one sort of fund. There was a tax fund. You went to these guys who were called tax funds. And as time went on, the Inland Revenue, or then became HMRC, got more and more annoyed that some of these films had budgets that were bigger than they really did, or some of these films were pretending to be British and they weren't really British, or some of these films were really a TV show that was sort of pretending to be a film to get the tax break. And there was just a lot of people who were doing some quite nefarious things to just get as much money as they could out of the system. So we went to one of those funds that was pretty bent, and I should have known better. It smelled bad. It did stink. And there was a time when the Inland Revenue were coming after more and more of these funds, closing down the loopholes, trying to sort of shut things down, as they were perfectly entitled to do. So we got involved with a particular fund that, as I said, was just outside the grey area and into the sort of like outright
into the red,
into the dodgy zone.
Yeah.
But for all sorts of reasons, my own ego, the fact that I wanted to get a film made, the fact that maybe you sort of didn't see things that you should have saw, or you pretended not to see things that you really knew were a really bad idea. And you just end up thinking, well, you need the money, hold your nose, sign the piece of paper. What's the worst that can happen? Turns out quite a lot. So that was a film called Starsuckers that got made in sort of the late 2000s. I said with some very, very smelly money, with the accountants involved asking us to do all sorts of things that we shouldn't have been doing. Film got made. I would say the film did very well. I was very proud of that film. But years later, and I do mean years later, the Inland Revenue came and started looking into these funds and seeing that they were like bent, and prosecuted all the people involved, of which I was one. So I got prosecuted for tax fraud it's 10 years ago now. So it was 2016 when it went to trial in Southwark Crown Court.
And that was quite some years after it originally happened as well.
Oh, years after. And that's no defense. Like, at no point in this do I ever want to exculpate. Like, what we did was wrong and definitely shouldn't have happened. So it was like 7, 8 years after we'd taken the money that we went on trial.
Yeah.
So, Chris, you just touched on it briefly there. And I think this is another part of the system, not necessarily prisons, but very much the pre-prison bit. Is there anything in particular that you remember or stays with you from the trial, apart from the obvious of the sentence being, or was it just that bit I won't answer for you?
From a personal point of view, psychologically, the trial was the worst bit in the process. People always say to me, they would write to me in my first few weeks in prison and going, oh, you must be having a terrible time in there. And I'd say, yeah, but it's not as bad as the trial. Like, things started getting better when I went to prison. That's how much I hated the trial. So, and it's because of the uncertainty, because you don't know what's going to happen. And as soon as you told what's going to happen, which in my case was pretty bad, like I was convicted and then given 5 years, but at least I had a certainty and I knew where the ship was going. But before, you're a ship rudderless in a storm, and that is somehow worse, even though there's still a chance you might get off.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, we're meaning-making machines, aren't we, us human beings? So when you don't have any answers, it's,
you've got no control.
No control.
And I'm not saying this to try and get sympathy, by the way. Like, I did do something wrong, and people like me should have been put on trial. So, but it's interesting to think back of the recollections of it. And also, because I'm a film director, I'm a massive control freak. Like, I have to control everything. And in all my films, I sort of do everything in all my films. I'm such a control freak. And when you're sitting there in the dock, you have no control over any aspect of the process. And so that's why I was just sitting there going...
Yeah, like on a human level for you in particular, it was... I think you'd be the same for that, Laura.
I would be, I'm
certainly
similarly
have some of those elements.
But it was interesting seeing the process from the inside. And ultimately, I do think it was fair. I mean, people think I'm mad for saying this. And I said, well, we did do it. So, they came to the right decision, I think. I mean, it's very painful to have to say that 10 years ago now. But, I did think, by and large, things about it that infuriated me. But in general, the process I thought was relatively fair.
Yeah. I think that's a good part of the healing, I think, to be honest. And without being too gratuitous, this is something I've always sort of thought about, fantasized about in weird ways.
The showers, what?
No, this next question, not what I've heard.
Did I pick up the soap?
Glutton for punishment.
Yeah.
Is that having walked into a few prisons around the country, just putting myself into those shoes, but I'd love to hear it from you. How was walking in day one, night one? Do you remember it?
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah, how was that?
I mean, I think for me it was odd because I'd been convicted and then I had a week before sentencing. So I sort of had a week to prepare for it. And I knew I was going to go down. Like, when I saw what they convicted us of and all that, I was like, and my barrister said, like, look, you were definitely doing time. It's just like a question of how low we can get it down to. So I sort of had a week to prepare. And then that was quite good in a way because I got to sort of see everyone and say goodbye to people and sort of get my head around it a bit. Not like kind of knew what was coming, but it wasn't like guilty straight in. It was there was a little buffer. And also I remember on the day itself, I was so flooded with adrenaline because it's quite a show when you go down for your sentencing. You walk in and there was, photographers waiting there and there was all these members of the press and a load of my friends and family had come down and it was like, oh, fucking hell. It was like there was a whole sort of thing. So it's kind of like the adrenaline really, really pumped me up. And also, barristers do this. They always try and give you the worst possible scenario. So if you get anything better than that, you feel they've done quite a good job for you. So they were talking about some insane sentences at one point. And the prosecution, it's the job of the prosecution at that stage to try and get the most they possibly can. Yeah. And it's the job of your barrister to get as little as he possibly can. It's the judge to sort of pick somewhere in the middle. And that's justice. They hear one side then the other, and then they sort of pick what they think is fair. So I'm not criticizing the process, but they were talking about like 8-9 years at one point.
Wow, that would have been long.
That would have been long. And it was sort of, I remember it's sort of like the internal ticker tape in my head, where the judge was talking about this because it was very complex, different charges, different amounts, different things. So in my ticker tape in head, I was like 6, 7, 8, 9. I was like, God, are we going to hit 10? Where's this guy going? And he does that to sort of scare the bejesus out of you. And he says, but on balance and on reflection, we're going to give you 5 years. So I was just like, only 5?
Oh, you thought that, did you, immediately?
Yeah, totally. I was like, at the time, I was in a very odd frame of mind.
No, for sure. It's a weird space to be in.
I was thinking particularly straight, but certainly there was a fear that there would have been more. I mean, I think 5 is crazy for what I did, but, I'm biased. So, but they were sort of, the numbers were going up. So to get 5, I was like, oh, actually, it could have been worse. And my barrister was like, oh, yeah, you got a touch there. would say that, wouldn't he? So I was flooded with adrenaline. So to answer your question, by the time I got to the prison, I was kind of really, really pumped. I was flooded with adrenaline, and it felt like this kind of weird force field around me. And so I didn't really hit me until about 2-3 nights in. It's like, oh, you're in prison and you've got a 5-year sentence. Do you know what I mean? I felt like I'd kind of not won, but I just felt like, oh God, 5's not too bad. And I also knew I'd done enough research on the system to know that you don't spend all of your time in a proper prison, right? Mm-hmm. So first of all, fixed sentences, you divide them by 2. So 5, I thought, well, that's only 2.5. And I knew that I could spend the last 2 years of my sentence in open prison. So therefore, there's only half of a year I'm going to spend in Wandsworth. So in my head, I was like, okay, I'm only going to be here 6 months.
Yeah.
And I remember that when I was sort of sitting down thinking, I was like going, okay, that maybe isn't quite as bad as it might have been. I ended up spending 9 months there, by the way. But in my head, I was like, oh, okay, maybe I can manage it. So that was okay. And then it was 3-4 days in, you're just thinking, oh my God, I'm here forever. The first day isn't so bad.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. And so you, which is quite common for a sentence even of, what is a fairly short 2.5 years within the prison system itself. But you went from Wandsworth, which you said, for 9 months.
9 months, yeah.
Which is category B. And then you did a short stint at HMP Ford.
Very short, yeah, about 2 months there.
2 months there, and then the rest of it at HMP Spring Hill.
Yeah.
Which is actually opposite Grendon, where we did learning together on the same site, HMP Grendon.
It's all the same site. Yeah, I'd walk past Grendon every day, yeah.
Yeah, so how was that for you going from prison to prison, both in terms of its geography and uprooting, I guess, a kind of community that you would have made? Yeah. I guess you would have made friends and connections. Very good friends. How was that in terms of being uprooted and...
Well, look, when you're at a place like Wandsworth, you're sort of doing everything you can to get out. It's called getting your DCAT. So prisons have 4 categories, I'm sure you know. Cat A, super high max for murderers and terrorists and all that. Category B is sort of next one down, and it's like holding prison. A lot of remand prisons are category B because I don't know who's there really day to day. So it's all quite high security. Cat C is sort of a bit softer, but still like an actual prison. And Cat D is open prison, which is, where you can walk out the gate and go and see your friends and family with a day pass, obviously, or you can go and work and do stuff in the community. Mm-hmm. Everyone's always trying to get to Cat D. Like Cat D is like the holy grail. It's the Willy Wonka magic ticket in your chocolate bar. Because when you've got your DCAT, you get on a bus and then you can start going out to McDonald's and
and you're getting slices of your freedom back.
You're getting slices of your freedom back. It's a different. Open prisons are not like real prisons. So everyone was just like, oh mate, got to get your Cat D. And I think because I was a first time offender. It was a white-collar crime, so it's non-violent and it's seen as relatively low risk in terms of the chance of reoffending. And I was well-behaved in prison. I was a kind of shoo-in for the Cat D. So I got my Cat D and I was out of Wandsworth in 9 months. So the shift from Wandsworth is a Cat B local. It's a horrendous Cat B local. I mean, you can talk about this to the cows come home, but the conditions there were dreadful in every way. So to go from that to Ford was hugely destabilizing because by the time I left Wandsworth, I was really like embedded.
Were you?
Like I had the best job.
Institutionalized.
I would say institutionalized. I don't like that term. I think it was more that I'd adapted.
Okay.
I was
Became
at
tough.
one with the system. I wasn't that. I just sort of knew everyone. I knew exactly how the system worked. I had the best cell. I had the best jobs. I had really good friends there. A lot of whom were staff and people who worked there. There was no them and us. We worked. I did because I did all these different jobs. So I was getting on pretty well with everyone. I was desperate to leave, but I was in my groove and time was passing very, very quickly. Once you're in your system, I was so busy. Because I did all these jobs, I kept myself as busy as I possibly could. The weeks were whizzing by. Yeah. I see my son every week because we're in a central London prison. So it's very easy for my son to come and visit. And I was sort of chilled. I was chill with it. So the move to Ford was hugely, hugely destabilizing, even though it's a far better place to be. It was like being hauled up by the roots and just going, drop down somewhere. And I remember like having like minor panic attacks those first few days, and I wanted to go back. A lot of people felt that. Yeah.
Wow.
Because I didn't go through Cat C. I went from B to D.
Is that quite common?
Big jump.
No. But for various reasons, I'd stayed in Wandsworth for quite a significant amount of time. So lots of people would go from Wandsworth to a Cat C prison where the conditions are a bit more relaxed, you get more unlocked, you've got a bit more freedom, and then to D. I just went, it's like getting an ice cube and dropping it in bucket of boiling water, basically.
Yeah.
So it was very destabilizing at first. Then after a week, I was like, oh yeah, no, this is better. I'm staying. I think I'll stay.
Yeah.
But the shift was very dramatic. Then the shift from Ford to Spring Hill wasn't as dramatic because it's one open to another open, basically. So it was a bit of a pain, but it got, then at Spring Hill, it got a lot better because I started going out into the community. I started getting my day pass, and I was doing a degree. I was doing an Open University degree in psychology, and they allowed me to transfer that to Oxford Brookes, which is very, very close to Spring Hill. So I was after a few months at Spring Hill, I was going out every day. I mean, 5 days a week for 12 hours a day. I just went back to the prison to sleep. So that was fantastic in comparison.
So that additional pain of that kind of geographical move was the toughest one, was it?
It was hard going to Ford because my ex, who's a very, very good friend of mine and who's brilliant, who was bringing my son in every week, she basically said, like, I can't come to Ford every week because it's 3.5 hour round.
Where is Ford for the listeners?
It's right down the south coast. It's a place called Ford. So it's Sussex.
Sussex.
It's on the seaside. We had seagulls flying in. It was mad. So it was just very, very hard for her to bring my son down every week. So it was weird. I was going to see less of my son at Ford than I was at Wandsworth, which is why a lot of people choose not to go to Open.
Yeah, I was going to say that actually, because I think something that's often not spoken about is the impact on families.
Yeah,
and particularly on children, of course, but wider family, parents, partners.
Yeah.
And actually people will potentially, look for transfers to be closer to family, but we don't often talk about the other side of that, do we, of the family and children of those who go in.
And having to go and visit. I mean, it was better. We were really keen to get away from Wandsworth because my son was coming in every week. And it was odd because he was 4 when I went away, and he didn't sort of appreciate the sinister seriousness of the prison. And it was really weird. It was like it was a peak best age for me to go away, weirdly. Because he was just like, oh, it's the building where Daddy lives. Didn't really understand what it was. And Lottie didn't want to call it the prison. She said she called it the building. It's the building that Daddy lives in. And he was like, oh, great, I see my dad there. And also they did have this sort of play area and toys and books, and he loved books and he loved being read to me. So it was the one time of the week we'd get to read to him, because I used to read to him all the time before. So he would come and sit in my lap and he would go, oh, I love that place. It's where I get my daddy reads to me and stuff. But there's friends of mine who had kids who were like 6, 7, 8 who were traumatized by Wandsworth, because it is, you've both been it.
Yeah.
It's scary, isn't it?
Yeah, it is scary.
Yeah,
Castles,
clanging
grey
and
skull.
the
Yeah,
noise.
It's exactly what you'd imagine.
It's the prisoner's worst nightmare, exactly.
Yeah.
So and that is, it's not like there's this nice bit for the visitors to go in. They go through the front gate. They go past all the barbed wire and the sniffer dogs and the CCTV and the pat downs and all that. They treat families of prisoners as though they're prisoners themselves.
Yeah.
It's always dreadful. The kids have a really difficult time. So I think we were quite keen to get me out of Wandsworth so that he wouldn't remember it and he wouldn't be sort of traumatized by it. And we did. So he then was coming to Ford, and he came to Ford, and there weren't many toys and games at Ford. And he was like, I prefer the other building. Can you go back to one of those?
Daddy, can you go back to
No, he did, because there was better books.
Well,
There was-
very
'cause at
interesting.
Ford-
And we'll go
because
on to the power of books.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
it was very tough for them. And then that's one of the reasons I moved to Spring Hill, just because Lottie was in North London. It was far easier for her to go up
Yeah,
to Spring Hill. And also when I started doing day release, it was far easier for me. Just, the geography of it was because I just go into Oxford and it's 45 minutes down
Yeah.
to Marylebone.
Yeah, easy.
Completely.
So when I was doing day release or release on a temporary license, I would come to London to see Kit. So he stopped visiting prison.
Yeah.
I would come
You
to
come to
London
him.
and
Yeah.
we'd go to Hampton
Yeah,
Heath
big
and have ice
difference.
cream. It's huge. Yeah, world changing.
Amazing. I've got one more question of your time in prison. And this might be a one-word answer, but we were debating whether to put this in. Is there anything you miss about prison?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, I have been asked this before, and there's odd things. So my cellmate in one of my many cellmates in Wandsworth, but my favourite one was a guy called Martin Dodgson, and he's in my book.
That's a good name.
Yes, he was a former managing director of Deutsche Bank, and he got done for weird sort of share fraud. Anyway, really good guy. He really looked after me when I was inside, because he'd been in for a couple of months before me. So when I moved in with him, I was still a bit, don't know which way is up. And he was like, you'll be fine. Took me under his wing, got me some good jobs, got some good food. He was really, really kind to me. And he always says, like, he's laughed more in the 3 months we shared a cell. And he laughed more in those 3 months than he has at any other point in his life. And I would probably agree with that. Like, we were like there, we're having a shit time. We're just going to take the piss. We're going to make each other laugh now.
Yeah.
And so there was a sense of camaraderie and a sense of community that you would form, not with everyone, but with certain people who were like kindred spirits. and a sense of connection that you forge very, very quickly with people because you're all going through a very shit time. And you just did very much look out for each other and look after each other that you don't really experience. It was weird. It kind of got a bit like that in lockdown. You know, that kind of, and lockdown was awful for many, many people in lots of ways. I'm not trying to romanticize it at all. But there was a kind of, dare I say, Dunkirk spirit. There was a sort of sense of community. Like, I met my neighbours in lockdown and I haven't spoken to my neighbours since. You know? And I think a lot of people felt that. People went and worked in their food banks. They went and delivered food for old people. Or, you know, whatever it was, there was a sense of community. And weirdly, there was that sense of, oh, everything's going to shit. Let's all look out for each other.
Yeah.
That was fostered in prison. And there were some dreadful people and there were some dreadful times. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it, but,
of course.
but there's elements of that. There was a closeness I had with people that I guess I don't have so much in my normal job now. It's back to all be nice, polite British.
Definitely.
You know, everything kind of slightly on the surface, superficial, transactional, where in prison, like if someone's having the worst day of their life, you can help that person hugely by just sitting them down, offering a cup of tea, giving them a shoulder to cry on and picking them off the floor again. You don't get those opportunities much in my outside life.
Mm-hmm. And there definitely is a gallows humour in prisons as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've written a whole book full of it. So
which
extremely funny.
Oh, it was very dark.
Funny.
It was very darkly funny and it was very mad and it was kind of so chaotic. I was just sitting there going, this is A, the worst experience of my entire life, but B, it's the best material I've ever had in my entire life. And I'm just going to account for all of it. I'm going to write it all down and keep notes because I'm not going to remember this and no one's going to believe me if I come out and say all this. So I need to keep notes of all this because it's so bonkers. I mean, the joke I always start with is because you're locked up all the time. That's the thing that they don't tell you about with prison. You watch Porridge or The Shawshank Redemption. They're all out. They're doing stuff. Something's quite dark, but they're at least out of their cell. In British prisons, it's like, no, just in your cell for 23, 24 hours a day because there aren't enough officers to open you up. So you'd start getting all these schemes and plans together. You just do anything to get out of your cell, just to walk around and sort of see people and get out of these sort of four walls. And there was this whole group of Muslims on my wing, and they all joined Alcoholics Anonymous. They all went to the AA. None of them had ever drunk in their lives. They're all teetotal. But it was the only way they could get out and see their mates.
Yeah.
So you go to the AA and it's full of Muslims. They've all got the 3 months sober badge.
It would have been the whole life.
They just
whole life
support you,
sober. Yeah.
Just being really
That's so
supportive.
good.
So it was, and I was like, oh, that's no good deal. Keep a note of that. So it was just stuff like that.
Yeah.
They had all these, Wandsworth was so weird. They had all these courses. They were obsessed with courses. Like you couldn't get loo roll. You can get fed some days. They'd turn the water off. There wasn't any heating. If it rained, like water would like a wall like Niagara Falls in the middle of the wing. So there was no money for that. But if you wanted to do like courses on mindfulness, you could do courses on mindfulness.
Really interesting.
Yeah, it's really we're obsessed with this stuff. So they did have all these like really weird programs. Anyway, there was a course on mindfulness called tunneling, and so there were these posters up going, tunneling, join our tunneling class or whatever. And everyone was just like, oh, this sounds absolutely great. So people were signing up and they weren't given spades.
They weren't given the
Not
tools.
even a spoon.
Not even a spoon. They were told how to control their breathing.
Boring.
So, I know, it's great. So it's like, and that was like a daily occurrence. Like every day there was something like that going on. So there was, and that sort of kept you going. Because then you'd come back to your cell. I'd come back to Martin. Oh, we never believe what I saw today. Or you'd say, they would never guess what I heard. So, and that, so the humor of it, the insane humor of it kind of kept us going.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'm a big fan of Time After Time. Obviously, A Bit of a Stretch is fantastic, but I think it's something that people don't often hear about is what it's like to leave prison. So I wondered, it'd be really helpful to chat about that period, what it was like to leave prison, whether there's anything you think might surprise people.
Getting out was very odd again. So we're talking 7 years ago now. God, time does fly. So yes, 7 years ago was when I got out. So very, very end of 2018, start of 2019. And again, hugely destabilizing. Again, it's a very, very positive move. You've been thinking about this day for literally every day for the last 2.5 years. I've been thinking about what it's like to get out. And then you get there and you're like, oh my God, this is it. And you expect like a fanfare and fireworks or something like that.
Yeah.
It's just like, well, off you go, mate. There's no sort of, nothing marks the occasion.
Off you go, don't come back.
Piece of paper, And again, it's hugely destabilizing because you think, oh God, what do I do now? And for 2.5 years, like, hadn't had to pay rent, or my food had been there, and like someone just basically sort of told you what to do, and then now you're coming out and you're like going, oh God, I've got to deal with the world. I've got to get like furniture. I had a flat I can move into. Didn't have any furniture in. So I was like, and I remember coming out and I remember it's always the mundane things that stay with you. I remember thinking, I don't know if I've got any towels, you know, and my son's moving in with me. And do I even have any towels for him? If he's going to have a bath. And so do you know what I mean? It's just suddenly I was just like, oh God, where do you get towels again? Oh yeah. So it was sort of doing that and sort of trying to sort of fit back in with the world and thinking like, the other weird thing about being in prison is it's comforting in its own weird way because everyone there's done something wrong. So it's not very judgy. Because and you say, oh, I got done for tax fraud, and they were like, that's not even a crime, is it? You know,
I can imagine.
Everyone's just like, oh God, you know, everyone's quite dismissive of it, and you suddenly think, oh, I'm moving out of that, I'm moving back into normal society where everyone does actually care that you've committed a crime, and people do think it's a big deal that you've done something wrong with, you know, the financial crime and stuff. So are people going to judge me? Well, in prison they don't. Because everyone's done something wrong. Yeah. Now you're moving into a world where not many people have, and people are going to think worse of you for it. So that was a big sort of stress. And how am I going to have money? And am I going to have a job? And, you know, I'm going to go and try and go on dates. And then I'm going to have to tell her that I've been to prison. And you know what I mean? So all those things are kind of going around your head. In a way they aren't when you're inside, in an odd way. You're just thinking about how great it's going to be when you get out. Then you start getting out and you're just like, oh my God, I've got to deal with all this stuff and I don't quite know how to.
Yeah. I can imagine that it's like the kind of the minutiae, but it's almost an avalanche of daily decisions that you've got to make, right? You know, like, okay, I've got to use, you know, I've got to message these people, I've use my phone, I've got to get it, what time am I getting up? When am I eating? What am I eating? Where am I getting it from? You know,
and you're paranoid of screwing up. And I think you're also paranoid of going back because you're out on license. So I was a fixed-term prisoner. Back then, 50% of your sentence was spent in custody. 50% is in the community being supervised on license. I wasn't supervised at all. But you're worried that you'll slip up and you'll go back. And that's a constant thing. That comes from open prison. So like in Wandsworth, you can't slip up at Wandsworth. You literally have to kill someone to go to a worse prison. You know, to go to Cat A, you'd have to set off a terrorist bomb to go from Cat B to Cat A. So you're kind of safe where you are in an odd way. But at open prison, you're very aware, and they make you aware that if you slip up, you'll go back to closed.
Go back.
And that happened like all the time. At Ford, it was farcical. They would like 60 people would get thrown out.
Really?
1 week. Yeah. They would have this like line of, but you'd like look out, there'd be this like line of minibuses outside, you know, and then all these, and it was justified most of the time. It's people, you know, failing an alcohol test or failing a drugs test or you know, being late back or whatever it was. Stuff like that. So people getting thrown out all the time. I would start when I was at Spring Hill. We would get a minibus out every day to Oxford Brookes, and at the start of the semester, it would be like 10 of us in the minibus. And by the end of the semester, it would just be me on my own. We'd pick up Conway, our mutual friend, Mark Conway, because he wasn't at Brookes, but he would come back on a train. So he would get the minibus back with us. There would just be me and Conway on the bus because everyone else had been thrown out. They'd all gone and got on the Coke or got on the beers or gone to a brothel or whatever. And so they called it Curse and Brookes because they just couldn't handle the freedom. They couldn't walk past a pub without going into it. I mean, I found that hard, but I managed to kind of hold my nerve. So they'd all get thrown out. So my point is, when I got to come out into the real world, I was kind of super paranoid that I was going to slip up and go back inside. Now, I was okay. I wasn't going to do that. I didn't do that. But that's very much a sort of a fear that's on your mind. Yeah,
well, it's always, I think people don't realise really that you know, what license is, and actually that's something that's hanging over you, and that actually you can be recalled to prison at any time during your license period. And
often for really stupid reasons.
For really small things.
And that's something I found out time after time. So when I got out, I started doing a podcast. So I did a podcast to go with A Bit of a Stretch, which was basically, it's also called A Bit of a Stretch, the podcast, which is me interviewing other prisoners about their experiences inside. Because I heard all these crazy, crazy tales and these people with phenomenal stories. So when I got out, I just went around and just started, you know, doing the podcast, because that's what everyone does, and sort of got a lot of their experiences down on tape, because they wouldn't go on camera. They didn't want to be identified, but they would tell me their stories.
Sense.
Yeah, I can understand. So I said, okay, well, let's say the names are changed. I won't go into detail on your crime, but your voice and your story is real. So I did a lot of that. And then that podcast kind of took off. And then when the podcast took off, I was messaging some of these people saying, oh, God, we got 4 stars in the Times. You know, we just got 100,000 downloads. This is like really happening. You're a star type thing. And I was getting on the WhatsApp message, 1 grey tick. But I nearly called the book 1 grey tick because it means the message has been sent but has not even been received. And the reason was they'd gone back inside.
Yeah.
So a lot of the people who had been inside with me and we'd gone on this big journey together and we'd all come out like roughly the same time. We'd all met up and had a drink and like, oh God, finally we're out. they've all gone back to prison.
Yeah.
And so time after time is me going, well, look, why is that? Like it was horrendous in Wandsworth. I mean, I joke about it. It was really bad.
No, it doesn't seem like a joke.
It wasn't a joke. And
Yeah.
but why did you go back? Like,
Yeah.
you know, if you didn't know how bad it was, you can understand you're someone ending up inside, but you'd come out going, well, not going back there again. And loads of them do. And these are people I knew really, really well. And I was like, well, what is going on with their lives and going on with the wider society and the system, which means that they inescapably get funneled back into the system. So that's what Time of Time's about.
Yeah. And what would you change about that point of leaving prison to help people get out, stay out?
It's really boring, basic things, but really obvious things that we know work. Housing, like give people somewhere to stay. I was very, very fortunate. I had a bit of money set aside, and I was a flat I could go to, so that was fine. But most people don't have somewhere to stay or don't have somewhere stable to stay.
Yeah.
And I said this at the start. They end up, I stayed with their mate. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's a trap house. So there's criminality on the doorstep. So housing is a massive deal. Get people somewhere to stay for a couple of months once they get out. Doesn't have to be nice. Doesn't have to be palatial. Don't worry, Daily Mail readers. You know,
I was going to say, this is where the clash comes again with the public.
Wallpaper.
You know, it's like, they're coming out of prison and getting a house. I can't get a house.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I can't get a free house.
No, and it's a tough sell. But you say, well, look, the alternative is they go on the streets and they start mugging you. So which would you prefer?
I agree to the point, by the way, for the record, for the tape.
But all the evidence shows that people come out with somewhere stable to live. They're far more likely to get back on their feet and not reoffend. Drugs and alcohol treatment, you know, because that's the reason that a lot of people end up inside. Weirdly, they can get some of this support when they're in prison. Not a lot, but it is there. They come out and suddenly all their treatment stops.
Yeah.
Mental health is a massive thing. Some of your stats earlier spoke to this. There's huge numbers of people who go through the system, have mental health condition, have learning disabilities, or drug addiction. You know, it's all part of the same complex problems. So, you know, keep consistent mental health treatment from when they go inside to when they get out. I mean, I interview people for this book who are like, we're inside, diagnosed schizophrenics. The schizophrenia was the reason that they offended.
Yeah.
They had treatment and medication when they're inside. They get out, it all stops. So stop taking the medication. They have a massive episode and they've been recalled in 4 days.
Yeah.
It's like, how the hell? And there's huge amounts of cost, huge amounts of disruption to them, to the system, to their victims and everything. It's just simply because there's no continuation of their mental health treatment.
Yeah.
So just really basic, and employment. But we know this, we bang on about this all the time, don't we? But jobs, get them jobs. Doesn't have to. I was messaging a prisoner this morning. It's an ex-prisoner. He's done 3 years. He's got out. He's working for Iceland. Great, good on Iceland for doing that.
Yeah.
Good on, like, you know, the company that's saying, look,
really good.
you know, and it's not brilliantly paid. He's probably not going to do it forever. He's stacking some shelves. He can pay for his flat. He can see his friends and family again.
Yeah, it's a great stepping stone, isn't it? And I think employers are becoming more and more supportive of employing people who've been released, but there's still so much more that can be done.
There's a huge stigma.
And I think when you know, we mentioned at the top there, when you say like, they need housing and, you know, this and this, these are all really quite expensive, you know, lots of resource, lots of hours going into that. But when you look at the cost of reoffending to the taxpayer, it's
vastly more.
You know, and you'd think even to like the Exchequer, you know, to Treasury, to then feed back into the Justice Department that would be so persuasive, especially at the moment, that reoffending, I don't know what, you know.
Was 18 billion.
Yeah.
And then, you know, how much would all those services cost in total? You know, maybe a couple billion.
I think the Netherlands is a really interesting example of this because they're actually closing down a lot of their prisons because they literally just don't have enough people to go into them. Yeah. And I think, you know, that's been a really concerted effort over the last kind of 20 years or so, 15, 20 years.
It takes that long.
It takes that long to see the real change flowing through the pipeline. And that's early intervention.
Here we're building them.
Here we're building a few more.
Yeah, exactly. And we can't build, we feel like we can't build enough. You know, there's new prisons opening all the time and they're literally closing them down. And I think it's that same thing of, you know, the argument was won in the public mind that it's just irrational to send.
Yeah, you need a political consensus. And if there's a political consensus, you can make it work. You need just all politicians to say, look, a massive criminal justice, why don't we follow the evidence?
Yeah.
It's weird because we do in medicine.
Yeah.
If someone says, look, matters of medicine, follow the evidence.
Yeah.
Let's do some trials. Let's do some surveys. Let's do some tests. Work out what works and what doesn't. If this pill works, we're going to fund it. This pill doesn't work, we're not going to fund it. That's how. It's really simplified, but that's generally how in medicine works. In criminal justice, we did the exact opposite. All the evidence shows that these things work. No, we're not going to do them. All the evidence shows these things make it worse. Yeah, we're going to do that.
And what's really interesting is nobody wins. We don't have like the big prison industrial complex like America, where there's lots of money churning through that. Lots of obviously there are some private prisons, but it's nowhere like that system. At the moment, nobody wins. We all lose. Yeah. And it just feels, it's very odd.
Yeah, futile.
Right. So we've left prison. You're out and about, and now we've got a sort of different, amazing sort of story arc, which brings you two together in an amazing and beautiful and funny sort of way. And that is Bang Up Books, or what became known as Bang Up Books.
Bang Up Books.
So Chris, I don't know if you want to start. What was the sort of brainchild of books, prisons, pairing, and then we'll talk about the relationship and how that's developed into the beast it is today.
The beast it is today. And I don't want to take too much credit for this because I think Laura has done most of the work on Bang Up Books.
Well, I mean, you can debate that until the cows come home. But the brainchild, the spark, the genesis.
Yeah.
Yeah. In that week between conviction and sentencing, I was like, okay, I've got to get ready for prison. What am I going to take? And so I thought, well, I'm one of those people who would buy books or get given books about books I really wanted to read, but I never got round to reading them because I was just so busy with my life and had a young son and everything else. So I'd always see like the guilt shelves, of like...
We've all got the guilt shelves.
We've all got the guilt shelves. So I was just like, well, fuck it. If I'm not going to read them inside, I'm never going to read them. And I was told that I could take books inside. And they said you can have as many books as you want. So I was like, I've got like about 30 here that I've never got around to reading. And I read all the books, went through the guilt shelf, and then people were always messaging me going, oh my God, you're inside, that's terrible, how can I help? And there was very little anyone could do to help. They said, let me come and visit. I said, no, don't, because I need the visits for my son. There's nothing really you can do to help me, but maybe send me a book. And I'd always say to people, they said, what do you want to read? I said, look, I don't know. I'm all over the place at the moment. Just send me what you think I might like.
Yeah.
Send me a book you've read that you think I might like. And so people did. And I was like inundated, like really inundated.
Which is amazing.
Which is great. And so I had lots of books and I was sort of giving away to other people. Say, oh, you want a book? Go and see Chris. Chris always goes. So I'd read them. I'd just give them to other prison stuff. And I was struck by how awful the prison library was in Wandsworth. And I should make this clear because sometimes I've had comments from librarians go, actually, the main library is quite good. It's not bad, the main library, but the library in the Trinity building, which where I was much smaller than this room. And I always joke, but this is true, they had fewer books than my parents' living room. And my parents are both teachers, they read a lot, so my parents have a lot of books, but they did have fewer books than my parents' living room. So I remember going in and going, this is awful. And it was all stuff that had been like rejected by libraries 30 years before, it seemed. So there was like Dick Francis. I don't know if Dick Francis, no offense, but, about 50 years old.
Dated, I guess, is probably
very, very, very dated.
a good word.
Very old, pages falling out, like drawings or something inside them. It was grim. So anyway, that always stayed in my mind. And I read a lot. I read a lot when I was inside. I wrote a book, obviously. And then when I got out, a year later, lockdown happened, and I was looking at the news, as we all were, for the terrible impact it had on all areas of society. But I was looking at the news on prisons, obviously quite closely, because I'd been inside and I'd just written a book, and I was talking a lot about prisons. So my book came out like 3 weeks before lockdown happened, which is quite mad. So I was seeing that all these prisons were shut down to the extent that families weren't allowed to visit, and any basic forms of programs there had all been shut down.
Yeah,
so
including education.
Education all been shut down, and all the courses, which is pretty thin anyway in the prison system. It's pretty rubbish what there is allowed there, but even the very, very slim programs that were there had all been cancelled. Prisoners stuck in their cells 24 hours a day. And I was like, God, that, I never thought it could be worse than when it was when I was inside, but it is obviously a lot worse now in lockdown. And I was thinking, God, people are going to be having a dreadful time. And, obviously rates of suicide and self-harm and mental health are all going to get much, much, much worse. So I saw a tweet from Pentonville, because I'm the kind of guy who follows Pentonville on Twitter. And they said...
Also, RIP Twitter, sorry.
RIP, well, no, exactly. Back in the days when Twitter was good. And they put out a tweet saying, look, our prisoners are all having a really awful time. If anyone has any books, could you drop round some books and we'll hand them out to the prisoners? And I was like, yeah, that works, because I still had books on my shelves that I'd read that I wasn't going to read again. So I sort of cleared a load of books off my shelves. And I messaged lots of people I know who live near me, typical North London media elite, but I have lots of friends who have lots of books they don't want. So I was just messaging authors and journalists and people I know who often get books sent to them for quotes or whatever, and they were like, oh yeah, brilliant. Great, I'm bored. I'll clear some shelves. Great. Come round, there'll be an IKEA bag on the doorstep and you can take all my unwanted books. Really good, nice new stuff. So I filled up the card, took it to Pentonville, handed it over, and they were like, yeah, got any more? There's like 1,000 men in it, and I've delivered like 100 books. And I was like, okay, I'll just message some more people. Sort of grew from there. We ended up messaging people within the prison system. I started messaging other London prisons, and they said, yeah, bring books. And so we were messaging librarians. I was messaging chaplains or people in the education department. It was all kind of like quite ad hoc. But I was getting people who had worked in media and the film business and were just sitting on their bums, not doing anything. Like cameramen were great because they have like big vans and then no one was filming anything.
Yes, it was COVID era.
It was COVID. So I was getting people with vans to come and pick up books, and I was coordinating these sort of drop-offs all over sort of the home counties. We kind of stayed near London for obvious reasons because that's where we all were. So we were just doing it ad hoc. And then I started messaging book agents and publishers to say, look, have you got any space? Have you got any shelves you want to clear? And they were like, yeah, we're downsizing, because it was a time when people were suddenly going, why do we need these massive offices?
I don't need this huge office anymore.
We don't need this huge office. We need a smaller office. So, oh shit, it's full of books. And I would literally call up and they were going, yeah, we'll give you 2 carloads. And it's like amazing, like brand new books.
Yeah, brand new.
Well, I think that's the point, isn't it, for Bang Up Books, really, is that
which it just started out like that.
Yeah.
It grew because you often get, as we have here, we have a proof copy of my own. So you'd often get
Special edition.
When a new book's published, the publisher will say, right, let's just run off like 1,000 proofs or 500 proofs to send to bloggers and journalists and just anyone, just get them out in the ecosystem ahead of publication. So someone hopefully reads it and tweets about it or writes a review or talks about it to their friends or whatever. It's like, it's like seeding copies. And often there's like 200 of them left.
Yeah,
they can't
and
get
they're always
rid of.
overstock anyway, even on the
They always
on the main
overstock. So they were like, oh shit, we've got 200 proofs of time after time on our shelves. Can you come and clear them out? So I go, yep, fine. And so I had a little lockup, and it was like, well, I've got 100 of Matt Haig or Satnam Segera, any of these amazing authors who like gave us their copies of their books. And I go, well, I've got 100 books, so I'll send 10 to this prison, 10 to that prison, 10 to that prison. So we were sort of boxing them all up, calling my dad to say, come on, come and drive to Brixton or whatever it is.
One of the first deliveries I did was with your dad.
Was with my dad. There you go. Because he needed someone strong
and muscular to help unload
and my
the
dad
car.
was like, it's a girl coming. I was like, she plays rugby, Dad. Be fine. She's stronger than I am. Don't worry about Laura. So we connected.
Yeah, should I maybe just
Yeah, I
share
was gonna
how
say,
we met?
share
'Cause I
how-
feel like this is
I was tweeting about it.
back to Twitter,
But I was
which is quite
tweeting
an
this.
important cornerstone of the
This
story.
is really good.
Twitter is an important platform here, which is that at the time it was actually, and this is quite a universal moment in that it was actually just after Jack had died. And for anyone who hasn't listened, give episode 1 a listen. We talk all about our story about Jack. But Jack had recently died. It was COVID. Things were pretty bad all over, and particularly bad for us. We were in that kind of real moment of grief. And one of our very good friends, Claudia, she was going through a difficult time, obviously, in the aftermath of the incident. And I'd read your book, and as soon as it came out, as you can see, I've got the hardback, and found it so funny, found it so connecting, really resonated with it. And I was like, oh, I think Claudia would really enjoy this. A bit like you said that in your difficult times, your friends, you asked them to send you books that they thought you would enjoy. And that was the same principle, really, which was that I thought it was something that she would enjoy. And connected with you on Twitter and realised that we were mutually connected through Mark Conway. So shout out to you, Mark.
The legend Mark
The
Conway.
legend Mark. And just dropped you a message to say, like, hey, would you, if I send you a copy of your own book, which was, when I've now realised, quite a strange thing to ask, will you sign it from my friend Claudia and put a message in it, because she's having a really tough time and I want to do something really special for her. And to my surprise, you actually messaged back on Twitter, which is quite amazing, really. And it probably says,
hey, look, I don't often get messaged by good-looking blonde women.
Yeah, I was going to say, I bet he messaged back quickly.
No, trust me, it's in
Also,
lockdown,
it was
I
COVID.
don't talk to anyone for
There
a
was
week.
nothing else to do.
Yeah, nothing else to do.
It was COVID, nothing else to
blonde,
do. Yeah, so you messaged back, which I was delighted by. And that kicked off our conversation. Actually shared that conversation to a whole room of people when we did our 100,000 book event. But that was the chance then for us to link up. And I was working at the Ministry of Justice at the time in prison policy. So was connected to prisons very, very closely.
You could open doors.
I could open
quite
doors.
literally open
Yeah.
doors. Yeah.
In a way that I think, it's still one of those things in that job that I did that I'm still very proud of, really, actually, because it was a moment where I thought, hang on, there's really something in this. And actually, let's try and see how far we can take it. So
we'd hit our ceiling of what we like, the kind of Dad's Army approach to book delivery.
Like throwing a book at a prison, driving
sort of
and
tossing them over the wall.
Yeah.
And it would sort of hit our limit, and it just needed to scale up.
Yeah.
Really.
And I think what people don't really appreciate is how resource intensive it actually is to deliver books to prisons. Prisons are often, yes, the London prisons, but often not easy to get to, often quite in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Often you've got to kind of go through layers of security and various things. It's a lot of effort.
It's all a bit suspicious. I mean, understandably so. They're like,
why are you dropping this stuff off?
Exactly.
So actually being able to connect and dock into the system is really important. So we set up, through my connection to the Ministry of Justice, we set up a distribution network that now, and if we fast forward to today, we're taking those brand new books from publishers in their overstocks.
By the thousands.
The thousands. So thousands and thousands. We're now at well over 275,000 books donated into prisons.
Brand new.
Since 2020. Brand new.
And to like over 100 prisons.
Over 120
There's only
prisons.
6 left that we don't have on our books, pun intended.
And we're in the process of trying to crack those. And but that makes it sound like we're trying to crack them as in trying to just do something untoward.
Why don't they want our books?
Just for the
Take
record.
the books.
It's optional. You can sign up if you want, but it's free. And that's the most
books,
amazing thing.
Free new
it's free
books.
to the people all the prisons that receive them. And they get used for all sorts of things. They're used in first nights, they're used in reception centres, they're used in visits, people read them to their children.
We do a lot of children's books, don't we?
We do a lot of children's books, and it's something that,
Reading groups. Book clubs, all that sort of stuff.
All sorts of things. So they're used in amazing ways. And quick shout out, we are launching an anthology of prison writing. It will come out in April, so keep your eyes out for that. And I think that's probably need to start wrapping us up. So Chris, quick fire questions, one sentence.
Go on.
Last episode, I called myself a cockroach. That was me describing my work personality. If your work personality was an animal, what would it be?
Oh, for goodness sakes. Cookie.
Cookie, the pod dog,
We've got
who has been watching the whole
in the
time.
studio. Oh, she's called.
Very, very emotionally needy.
Here she is.
Short memory.
Here she is.
Massively
Cookie.
desperate for attention, but very little productivity.
Okay, that's you.
An insight. And then, Lou, what have you been doing to keep sane outside of work this week?
So lots of sport heavy. So it's Six Nations, which is my favourite sporting tournament in the world. Happens to be every year, which is fantastic. And we went to Twickenham, which is my first ever Six Nations game live, which was amazing. Watched us batter Wales. Didn't really get out of third gear, but like I said, that's probably one for a different podcast. Lots
Big
of
win.
sport.
And you, Chris?
I'm just putting the finishing touches on my latest documentary.
Ooh.
Let's see what I did there with a plug.
Yeah,
Very
good
good.
plug. What can you say about it?
Oh no, I can be quite open. It's about the band James. Some of
Yes,
your older
love
listeners.
James. My mum and dad also
There you go.
love James, but so do I. And so does Laura.
I do. I'm
And
a
we
big
were actually
fan.
at Glastonbury when you were
I
there
was
doing
there.
the
I was
bits.
filming
on the other
side.
stage.
So yes, that is called Getting Away With It. It's the story of
see what you did there.
Britain's maddest, most colourful, I think most brilliant pop band, rock bands, whatever they are, art band maybe, called James. Their 40-year crazy history. They joined cults and beat each other up, but they're wonderful. So they are, so yes, I'm just putting finishing touches on that, and that's going to be coming out in a couple of months.
Fab. We'll keep an eye out for it.
Amazing. And that is all we've got time for today. So thank you again to Rustic. Thank you to Dan Garwood and Ollie Drummond. We've now got lyrics in our intro tune. We're here. You might notice that we're in a different venue. We've made special arrangements for our VIP guests today. We are in Hornsey Town Hall, and we'll be back south of the river in our spiritual home next episode. Thank you so much, Chris, for being our guinea pig guest, our first of many, hopefully. And if you've liked the first few episodes, do all the bits, like, share, subscribe, send them to your mum, your nan, your dad, whoever. And see you next time.
So you found out now, find out how, what was wrong and what is is right now. Sit back and listen to the Merrittocracy's podcast. So you found out now.